I knew I was being removed from the board the moment the turtleneck walked into the conference room, waving his hand like he was ordering drinks at a Berlin cafe, and said, "We need to eliminate outdated processes, both people and systems." I was the person, and the system was what I'd kept standing for 15 years. They thought they'd removed a pawn, but they forgot. I was the rook, and I'd just castled. My name is Marla Vance, and for 15 years, I was the invisible spine that kept Corradine Industries from collapsing under the weight of European environmental regulations. 38 years old, single by choice, and married to a job that required me to speak fluent legalese in 3 languages while juggling compliance reports that could sink a company faster than you could say EPA violation. Corradine wasn't just any chemical company. We produced high-grade industrial solvents that went into everything from smartphone screens to surgical equipment. One misplaced decimal in our environmental reports, one unsigned form, and we'd face fines that would make shareholders weep into their quarterly statements. That's where I came in, Director of Quality Control, though my real title should have been the woman who keeps us out of prison. The Rotterdam office was a monument to Dutch practicality: glass, steel, and enough regulatory binders to build a small fortress. I'd arrived there every morning at 7:30, sharp, coffee in hand, ready to navigate the Byzantine maze of European Chemical Agency requirements, EPA standards, and local environmental laws that change faster than fashion trends in Milan. Then Axel Morgan arrived, Harvard MBA, age 34. With the kind of confidence that only comes from never having seen a real crisis unfold. He swept into Corradine like he was liberating Paris. All vision statements and disruption rhetoric. His LinkedIn profile read like a Silicon Valley fever dream. Thought leader. Innovation catalyst. Digital transformation evangelist. The board ate it up like starved seagulls finding French fries. The meeting that would end my career started like any other quarterly review. Conference room A, 9th floor, with its panoramic view of the Rotterdam port. I'd prepared my usual presentation: compliance rates, audit results, risk assessments, numbers that kept us legal and profitable. But when I walked in that Tuesday morning, the atmosphere had shifted. The old guard sat silent, eyes downcast. The new hires, Axel's imports from various startups, perched on their chairs like eager students waiting for their professor to blow their minds. Axel stood at the head of the table, MacBook Air connected to the projector, wearing his signature black turtleneck that he probably thought made him look like Steve Jobs, but actually made him look like he'd raided a drama student's closet. His presentation was already on screen. Restructure for innovation, building tomorrow's Corradine today. Legacy systems, he began, clicking through slides that looked like they'd been designed by someone who'd just discovered gradients, are killing our agility. We're drowning in paperwork while our competitors are surfing the digital wave. I watched him pace, hands gesticulating wildly as he painted a picture of a company unburdened by what he called 20th century thinking. Every third word was blockchain, or AI-driven, or cloud-native. It was corporate Mad Libs, and everyone was nodding along like it meant something. "We need to be lean," he continued, his eyes scanning the room like a predator identifying the weakest in the herd. "Some positions have become redundant. Quality control, for instance, can be fully automated. Environmental compliance, there's an app for that." That's when his gaze landed on me, held it for just a second too long. A smirk played at the corner of his mouth, the kind that said he'd already made his decision long before this meeting. I was already dead. This was just the funeral. "Marla," he said, my name sounding foreign in his mouth, like he was pronouncing an extinct language. "You've been here, 15 years?" 15 years of perfect compliance records, I replied, keeping my voice steady as a surgeon's hand. "Exactly my point," he said, turning to address the room as if I'd just proved his thesis. 15 years of doing things the same way. Where's the innovation? Where's the disruption? We're not a museum. We don't need curators for obsolete processes. The room was silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. I could feel my colleagues' eyes avoiding mine. The way people look away from accidents on the highway. They knew what was coming. We all did. But I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me squirm. I opened my notebook, real paper, real pen, because some things shouldn't be trusted to the cloud, and began writing. Not notes from his presentation. Something else entirely. Something for later. Because Axel Morgan, in all his disruptive wisdom, had forgotten one crucial thing. In chess, the most dangerous piece isn't always the queen. Sometimes it's the piece that controls the squares you never thought to protect. The slide changed. There it was, in 72-point Helvetica Neue. Eliminating legacy expenses. Below it, an organizational chart with 3 positions highlighted in red. Mine was at the top, like a wanted poster at the post office. Effective immediately, Axel announced, his voice carrying the casual cruelty of someone ordering a latte. We're restructuring our quality and compliance departments. These positions, he laser pointed at the red boxes, are being sunset. It's nothing personal. It's evolution. Evolution. As if 15 years of keeping this company out of regulatory hell was some kind of prehistoric relic that belonged in a natural history museum. I felt the room's temperature drop. Or maybe that was just my blood running cold. Marla, he continued, and now everyone was looking at me, their faces a mixture of pity and relief that their names weren't in red. You've been a loyal soldier, but we don't need soldiers anymore. We need innovators, digital natives, people who understand that compliance isn't about filing papers, it's about algorithms. He actually said that. Algorithms. As if the European Chemical Agency would accept a blockchain signature on a hazardous waste manifest. As if environmental inspectors could be charmed by machine learning models instead of actual documentation. The good news, he said, and I knew whatever followed would be anything but, is that we're offering a generous severance package, 2 weeks, plus accumulated vacation time. Very fair, considering. Considering what? That I'd saved this company approximately 12 million euros in potential fines over my tenure? That I personally knew every inspector from here to Brussels? That I'd built relationships with regulatory bodies that couldn't be downloaded from the App Store? Then came the kicker. The moment that transformed this from a termination into a declaration of war. I like to call it liberating legacy, Axel said, his smile widening as if he'd just coined the phrase that would land him a TED Talk. Some of our longest-serving employees have become, well, expensive artifacts. The legacy lady here, he gestured at me like I was Exhibit A, probably still uses filing cabinets. Probably has binders full of regulations from the Obama administration. Tell me, Marla, when was the last time you updated your workflows? When was the last time you asked yourself if your job could be done by someone at half the cost with twice the innovation? Legacy lady. The words hung in the air like toxic fumes from one of our chemical spills. A few of the newer employees actually chuckled. Brad from Digital Strategy was practically glowing, probably already mentally moving into my office. I stood up slowly, gathering my things with the deliberate calm of someone defusing a bomb. My notebook, my pen, my dignity, all carefully collected while Axel continued his performance. You know what's really funny? He was saying to his audience of sycophants. She probably has actual paper files. Physical documents. Can you imagine? It's 2024 and she's running our compliance like it's 1994. Next thing you know, she'll want to bring back fax machines. More laughter. Forced, nervous, but laughter nonetheless. The kind that comes from people who know they're watching something cruel but are too afraid to object. Actually, I said, my voice cutting through the room like a scalpel through skin, I do have paper files. Would you like to know why? The room went quiet. Axel's smile faltered for just a microsecond. Because when the ECHA conducted their surprise audit last year, their 70-year-old inspector wanted physical signatures on physical documents. Because when we had that server crash in March, guess whose paper backup saved us from missing our quarterly filing deadline? Because some things, Mr. Morgan, can't be disrupted. They can only be destroyed. I walked to the door, paused with my hand on the handle. Oh, an Axel? That Form 47R you'll need to file next week. The one that requires biometric authentication from the designated compliance officer? Good luck finding an app for that. His face went pale, just for a moment, before the smirk returned. We'll manage. We always do. I'm sure you will, I said, allowing myself the smallest smile. After all, you're innovators. I left the conference room with my head high, walking past the cubicles where my soon-to-be former colleagues sat in stunned silence. At my desk, I took only what was mine, personal items, nothing proprietary. But I did leave something behind. A single sticky note on my monitor. Neon pink, impossible to miss. You'll want to call Iche in 10 days. The legacy lady. They thought they were removing dead weight. They thought they were streamlining. They thought a lot of things. They never thought to ask who held the keys to the kingdom they were so eager to digitize. The security guard who escorted me out was Willem, a man I'd shared morning coffee with for 5 years. His eyes apologized while his hands collected my keycard. Orders, he muttered in Dutch. I nodded. We all had our roles to play. But before I surrendered that piece of plastic that had defined my professional existence, I made 3 stops. 3 completely legal, entirely within my rights as a still, technically employed person, stops. First, the biometric scanner in the compliance office. Every Form 47R, the crown jewel of hazardous waste reporting that kept us compliant with EU Regulation 1357/2014, required my thumbprint and retinal scan. Not just any thumbprint. Mine. Specifically designated in our operating license, notarized in triplicate, filed with The Hague. I placed my thumb on the scanner one last time and revoked my own access. The system asked for confirmation 3 times. 3 times I clicked yes. Second stop, my computer. While Brad from Digital Strategy was probably already measuring my office for his standing desk, I logged into the environmental compliance portal. My credentials were still active. Axel's immediate termination apparently didn't account for the 2-hour IT processing delay. I navigated to the authorized signatory page. There I was. Marla Vance, sole authorized signatory for environmental compliance reporting, Coradine Industries, B.V. I didn't delete anything. Deletion would be sabotage. Instead, I simply closed my account, logged out, permanently. The system helpfully informed me that reactivation would require in-person verification at the ECHA offices in Helsinki, with a processing time of 15 to 20 business days. The final stop was the server room. Carl, the IT manager, was conveniently at lunch, probably crying into his stroopwafel about losing another colleague to Axel's innovation purge. I had legitimate access. My card still worked for another 90 minutes. I found the backup compliance server, the one nobody remembered existed because it wasn't cloud-based or AI-powered or whatever buzzword Axel was fellating this week. It just quietly hummed along, storing 15 years of my work. I didn't touch it, didn't need to. But I did check the last backup date, 3 weeks ago. The next automatic backup was scheduled for, I smiled, 11 days from now. 1 day after the Form 47R deadline. On my way out, I stopped by the supply closet and took a single pack of sticky notes. Pink ones. My personal property. Purchased with my own money. I'd need them for my garden markers. Willem walked me to my car in silence. As I loaded my box of possessions into the trunk, a spider plant, a coffee mug that said, "World's Okayest Employee," a photo of my cat, he finally spoke. "Ms. Vance," he said in English, formal now that we were in the parking garage's CCTV range. "What should I tell people when they ask about you?" I considered this. What do you say when you've just pulled the cornerstone out of a building and are waiting for physics to take its course? "Tell them I've gone home to tend my garden," I said. "It's tomato season." He frowned, confused. It was October. I drove away from Corradine Industries at exactly 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. In my rearview mirror, the building looked solid, permanent, innovative, a monument to disruption. But I knew something they didn't. Some monuments are built on sand, and the tide was already turning. That evening, I sat in my apartment in Delft, 30 minutes from Rotterdam, but a world away from corporate chaos. I opened my notebook, the one I'd been writing in during Axel's presentation, and reviewed my notes. Not about his slideshow, about something else entirely. Every system has a manual override. Every security protocol has a failsafe. Every innovation evangelist has a blind spot the size of their ego. Axel thought he was playing chess, moving pieces, controlling the board. But he'd never learned the most important rule. Before you sacrifice your defensive pieces, make sure you know what they were defending against. I poured myself a glass of wine, a nice Riesling, because despite what Axel might think, some of us legacy folks have taste, and opened my laptop, not to job hunt. Not to update my LinkedIn with some passive-aggressive post about new opportunities, no. I opened my personal email and set up a single automated message, scheduled to send in 10 days. Dear former colleagues, if you're reading this, it's October 20th. And you've just discovered that the Form 47R is due today. You've probably also discovered that no one currently employed at Corradine can legally sign it. I'm sure there's an app for that. Best regards. The Legacy Lady, P.S. My consulting rate is $500 per hour, minimum 40 hours. I'm sure that fits within your newly streamlined budget. I closed the laptop, walked to my window, and looked out at the orderly Dutch streets below. Somewhere in Rotterdam, Axel was probably celebrating his successful restructuring, probably posting about it, probably already forgetting my name. That was fine. In chess, the best attacks are the ones your opponent doesn't see coming. And Axel Morgan had just played himself into check. The train from Rotterdam to Zandvoort took 43 minutes. I'd made this journey once before, years ago, when I'd inherited my grandmother's cottage. Back then, I'd seen it as a burden. Another property to maintain, another tax to pay. Now, as the Dutch countryside blurred past my window, I saw it for what it really was, a perfect observation post. The cottage sat 3 streets back from the beach, hidden behind a wall of deliberately overgrown honeysuckle. The neighbors knew me as the woman who came on weekends to pull weeds and argue with the ancient boiler. They didn't need to know about the MBA from Erasmus University or the 15 years I'd spent preventing environmental catastrophes. Here, I was just Marla, the one who grew surprisingly good tomatoes for someone with a black thumb. I spent the first 3 days doing absolutely nothing corporate. I fixed the loose shutter that had been annoying me for 2 years. I cleaned out the greenhouse, discovering a family of mice had made a comfortable home in my gardening gloves. I read an entire novel, actual fiction, not a single regulation or compliance manual in sight. I cooked elaborate meals for one, using recipes I'd bookmarked years ago, but never had time to try. The locals at the village market didn't ask why I was there on a Wednesday morning instead of at work. The fishmonger simply noted that I looked healthier, less gray around the edges. Vacation? He asked in Dutch. Something like that, I replied, buying enough Sol for 2 dinners. My phone stayed silent. Not completely, my mother called to discuss her bridge club drama. And a recruiter from LinkedIn left a voicemail about an exciting opportunity in Berlin. But from Corradine? Nothing. Not a single text, email, or call. It was as if 15 years had been erased with the same efficiency Axel applied to his PowerPoints. I wasn't angry. Anger would have implied I hadn't seen this coming. Instead, I felt the kind of calm that comes from knowing exactly where you've placed your pieces on the board. On day 4, I planted actual tomatoes in the greenhouse. October was absurd for tomato planting, but I'd bought heat lamps and borrowed a technique from a Norwegian gardening blog about extending growing seasons. If you control the environment carefully enough, you can make anything grow when it shouldn't. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. Day 5 brought the first sign of movement, not from Corradine, but from Marcus Chen at Regulatory Affairs Weekly, a trade publication I'd written for occasionally. Heard about the restructuring at Corradine. His email read, "Care to comment for our piece on automation and compliance?" I declined. Politely. The time for comments would come later. Day 6. I repaired the garden wall. Physical labor felt good after years of ergonomic office chairs and climate-controlled environments. Each brick I mortared into place was solid, real, permanent in a way that Axel's innovations would never be. My hands got dirty. My back ached. It was glorious. Day 7 was Sunday. I walked to the beach early, before the tourists arrived with their children and dogs and noise. The North Sea was gray and indifferent, the way it had been for millennia before Corradine Industries existed, the way it would be long after Axel's algorithms were forgotten code in some obsolete programming language. A seal popped its head above the waves, watching me with curious eyes before disappearing. Even it knew better than to trust the surface of things. Day 8, I saw the first crack in the wall. Not my garden wall, that was solid. But in the careful silence from Rotterdam, it came in the form of a LinkedIn notification. Brad from Digital Strategy had viewed my profile, then viewed it again an hour later, then 3 more times before lunch. Either he was very interested in my career history, or someone had asked him to figure out what I knew that they didn't. I didn't reach out, didn't update my status, didn't do anything except make a note in my journal, yes, paper journal, because some thoughts shouldn't live in the cloud, about the timing. Day 8. They were starting to realize something was wrong. Day 9 brought rain, the kind of persistent Dutch drizzle that makes you question your life choices. Perfect weather for staying inside, drinking tea, and watching my tomato seedlings push through the soil against all botanical logic. They were growing because I'd created the right conditions for them to grow, just like I'd created the right conditions for something else entirely. That evening, I opened my laptop for the first time since setting up the automated email. My inbox had several new messages. A former colleague asking for my personal number just to keep in touch. Another wondering if I happened to remember the password for the old compliance drive. A third, more direct. "Hey Marla, quick question about the 47R process." I deleted them all unread. Well, I read them first. I'm only human. But then I deleted them. They'd figure it out tomorrow. Or they wouldn't. Either way, it was no longer my problem. That night, I slept better than I had in 15 years. No dreams about missed deadlines or failed audits. Just the sound of rain on the roof and the distant rhythm of the sea. Tomorrow would be day 10. Tomorrow, the music would stop, and Axel Morgan would realize he'd been dancing alone the whole time. Day 10 arrived with unusual sunshine, the kind that makes the North Sea look almost Mediterranean if you squint and have had enough wine. I was in the greenhouse, adjusting the heat lamps for my rebellious October tomatoes, when my phone erupted. Not rang, erupted. 17 calls in 3 minutes. Text messages piling up like a highway accident. WhatsApp, Signal. Even a Facebook message from someone I hadn't spoken to since 2019. The Corradine Communications Department had apparently discovered my number existed outside their carefully managed ecosystem. I let them all go to voicemail while I finished watering the seedlings. Can't rush these things. Tomatoes are sensitive to sudden changes in moisture levels. The first voicemail was from Hendrik in legal, his usually pompous voice pitched 2 octaves higher than normal. "Marla, we need to discuss the Form 47R situation immediately. There seems to be some confusion about the submission process. Call me back, please." The second, from someone in HR I'd never heard of. "Ms. Vance, there's been a misunderstanding about your separation terms. We'd like to discuss an amended arrangement." The 3rd through 15th were variations on a theme, panic dressed in corporate speak. Then came number 16. Axel himself. "Marla, we need to talk. There's been a development with the regulatory filing. I'm sure we can work something out that benefits everyone. Call me. No legacy lady. No jokes about filing cabinets. Amazing how quickly innovation takes a back seat when the European Chemical Agency comes knocking." The 17th call was different. It was from Peter Voss. chairman of Corradine's board of directors, a man I'd met exactly twice in 15 years, both times at Christmas parties where he'd called me Martha. Ms. Vance, his message began, and he had my name right this time. I'm calling regarding an urgent communication we've received from Iche. It seems there's a significant compliance issue that requires your specific expertise. I would appreciate a return call at your earliest convenience. I made myself a cup of tea. Earl Grey, because crisis always tastes better with bergamot, and sat in my garden to check the news on my tablet. There it was, buried in the afternoon updates on Chemical Week Europe. Corradine Industries faces potential $4.7 million fine for missing environmental compliance deadline. The article was brief but damning. The Form 47R, requiring authenticated biometric signature from the designated compliance officer, had not been filed. The company had attempted to submit the form that morning, but Iche rejected it due to invalid authorization. Preliminary investigation suggested the signature had been attempted by an unauthorized party. My phone rang again. This time, it was Sarah, my former assistant, using her personal number. I answered on the fifth ring. Hello, Sarah. Oh, thank God, she breathed. Marla, it's chaos here. Absolute chaos. They tried to file the 47R this morning and... Who signed it? That's the thing. Axel had Brad try to forge your electronic signature, but the system flagged it immediately because your biometric access was revoked. Then they tried to add Axel as a signatory, but each says it takes 20 business days to process a new authorization, and the form was due today. And now there's an inspector coming from Brussels, and... Sarah, I interrupted gently. This isn't my problem anymore, remember? I'm a legacy expense. But you're the only one who can fix this. You're still technically the authorized signatory. If you could just come in and... My consulting rate is €500 per hour, 40-hour minimum. Silence. Then, are you serious? Completely. Have HR send the contract to my personal email. I'll review it this evening. This evening? Marla, the inspector is coming tomorrow morning. Then HR better work fast. I hung up and went back to my tomatoes. The seedlings were already 2 inches tall, defying every agricultural expectation. Sometimes the best fertilizer is knowing exactly what you're worth. By 3 o'clock, my email contained a consulting contract from Corradine. By 3:15, I'd sent it back with amendments. 6-month minimum term. Rate increased to €750 per hour. And a clause requiring a written apology from Axel Morgan for the Legacy Lady comment to be posted on the company's internal network. By 4, they'd agreed to everything except the apology. By 4:30, after ETJ announced they were expanding their investigation to include the previous quarter's filings, they agreed to that too. I didn't respond immediately. Let them sit with their anxiety a bit longer. Let them feel what it's like when the person you've dismissed as obsolete holds the keys to your survival. Let them understand that innovation without foundation is just another word for collapse. That evening, as the sun set over the North Sea, I sat in my garden with another glass of Riesling and my laptop. The automated email I'd scheduled was due to send in 30 minutes. I could have canceled it. Should have, probably, given the consulting contract. Instead, I edited it slightly. P.S. My consulting contract has been accepted. I'll be in the office Thursday. The Legacy Lady sends her regards. Then I let it send, because sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's letting them pay you handsomely to save them from themselves. Before returning to Corradine, I spent Wednesday assembling my insurance file. Not insurance in the traditional sense. This was something far more valuable. This was evidence of exactly how deep the rot went. First, the contracts. I'd kept copies of everything, perfectly legal under Dutch labor law. The original agreement naming me as sole authorized signatory for ICHA submissions. The addendum from 2019 reconfirming this after the previous CEO tried to add his secretary as backup, only to have ICHA reject it for lacking proper qualifications. The email chain where legal confirmed that changing the signatory would require board approval, regulatory filing, and a minimum 3-week processing period. Second, the Slack screenshots. Thank God for paranoia and cloud storage. There was Axel's message from his first week. Why does one person control environmental compliance? Seems like a bottleneck. Fix this. Brad's response, looking into workarounds. The IT director's warning. This isn't something we can just change. It's hard-coded into our operating license. Axel's reply, everything can be disrupted. Third, the emails. A greatest hits collection of Axel's innovation theater. Compliance is just paperwork. We need to move fast and break things. Regulations are guidelines, not rules. And my personal favorite, sent to the entire management team. Marla represents everything wrong with old Corradine. Too cautious, too slow, too expensive. Fourth, the timeline I'd reconstructed. October 10th. I'm terminated. October 11th. Brad attempts to access the compliance system using my old credentials. October 12th and 16th. Multiple failed attempts to add new signatories. October 17th. Someone tries to submit the Form 47R with a forged signature. October 18th. Panic. But the crown jewel of my collection was something I discovered that morning while reviewing old files. An email from Axel to the board, dated 2 weeks before my termination, with a consulting report attached. The subject line? Project Lighthouse, Automating Legacy Functions. The report, prepared by some boutique firm in Berlin, identified redundant human-dependent processes and promised 40% cost savings through intelligent automation solutions. Page 47 specifically mentioned the Form 47R process. Their recommendation? Deploy RPA, robotic process automation, with synthetic biometric simulation to eliminate single point of failure risk. In other words, Axel had planned to fake my signature all along. He just hadn't expected me to revoke my own access first. I printed everything, yes, printed, physical copies in a physical folder that couldn't be deleted, corrupted, or mysteriously disappear from a server. Call me old-fashioned, call me the legacy lady, call me someone who understands that paper trails are called that for a reason. The phone rang while I was organizing the documents. It was Marcus from Regulatory Affairs Weekly again. Marla, I'm hearing interesting things about Corradine. Care to comment now? On the record? If you're willing. I considered it. The story would write itself. Corporate hubris meets regulatory reality, but that would be playing a short game. And I was thinking longer term. Not yet, Marcus. But keep your calendar clear next month. I might have something better than a comment. A whistleblower situation? No. A resurrection story. How the legacy lady saved Christmas. He laughed. You're enjoying this. I'm gardening. Amazing what grows when you create the right conditions. That afternoon, I received another contract from Corradine. Not just the consulting agreement, that was already signed. This was something new, a permanent position offer. Senior Vice President of Regulatory Affairs and Compliance. Salary, double my previous rate. Benefits, comprehensive. Duration, indefinite. Reporting to the Board of Directors, not Axel. Attached was a handwritten note from Peter Voss. We should have listened. We will now. I didn't respond immediately. Let them wonder if money was enough. Let them question whether their offer was sufficient. Let them understand that some things, expertise, relationships, institutional knowledge, can't be bought. They can only be earned, cultivated, and respected. That evening, I walked to the beach one more time. The seal was back. Or maybe it was a different seal. Hard to tell with seals. It watched me with the same curious eyes, as if asking what I planned to do. I'm going back. I told it. But not as the same person, not as someone who quietly maintains the system while others take credit. I'm going back as someone they need more than I need them. The seal disappeared beneath a wave, apparently satisfied with my answer. I drafted my response to the board that night. 1 page, bullet points, properly formatted because I'm not an animal. Outlining my conditions. I would accept the SVP position. Axel would report to me on all compliance matters. Brad would be reassigned to a non-critical department. The legacy lady comment would be addressed publicly. My first initiative would be implementing proper succession planning for critical roles. My second would be a mandatory training program. Why regulation isn't optional, a primer for innovators. At the bottom, I added one line. These terms are non-negotiable. You have until 9 a.m. tomorrow to accept. Then I opened my journal and wrote a single word. Checkmate. Tomorrow. I would walk back into Corradine Industries. But this time, they would understand exactly what they'd almost lost. Sometimes you have to let people fail to teach them the value of success. Thursday morning arrived crisp and bright, the kind of October day that makes Rotterdam's glass towers look like crystal spears piercing the sky. I dressed carefully, my best suit, the charcoal one that meant business, paired with the Hermès scarf I'd bought myself after preventing a €20 million disaster in 2021. Looked like money, command money. The ECHA inspector was already in the building when I arrived at 8:45, 15 minutes before my deadline. I recognized him immediately. Johannes Decker, 71 years old, the same man who'd insisted on paper signatures last year. He was sitting in the lobby, reading an actual newspaper, looking like someone's grandfather who'd wandered in by mistake. But I knew better. Decker had shut down 3 pharmaceutical companies for compliance violations. He collected corporate scalps the way others collected stamps. Inspector Decker, I said in Dutch. Still reading De Volkskrant? I see. He looked up, and his weathered face cracked into what might have been a smile. Ms. Vance, I heard you'd left. Temporary misunderstanding. Ah. He folded his newspaper deliberately. And yet your signature, or what claimed to be your signature, appeared on a document yesterday. Interesting, since security footage shows you haven't been in the building for 10 days. There it was. The killing blow, already chambered and ready. But not aimed at me. Perhaps we should discuss this upstairs, I suggested. With all relevant parties present, the elevator ride to the executive floor felt like ascending to a tribunal. Decker said nothing, but his presence filled the space like a gathering storm. When the doors opened, we found chaos dressed in business casual. The conference room was packed. The board of directors, looking like they'd aged 5 years in 5 days. The legal team, armed with tablets in desperation. Axel, his turtleneck replaced by an actual tie that he kept touching like it was strangling him. And Brad, relegated to the corner, laptop open, probably updating his resume. Gentlemen, I said, not bothering with the pretense that any women besides me had made it to this level. Inspector Decker has some concerns about our filing procedures. Peter Voss stood immediately. Ms. Vance, thank you for coming. We've accepted all your terms. The contracts are... First things first, Decker interrupted. Who authorized the attempt to forge Ms. Vance's biometric signature? The room went silent. Axel's face cycled through several colors, none of them healthy. It was a misunderstanding. Axel started. We believed the signature could be digitally replicated through our new automation system. You believed, Decker said slowly, that you could commit fraud. No, we were innovating. Mr. Morgan, I interrupted, pulling out my folder of evidence. Perhaps you should review this before you continue. I spread the documents across the table, like tarot cards revealing a fortune. The emails, the Slack messages, the consulting report recommending synthetic biometric simulation, each page landing with the weight of a coffin nail. Decker picked up the consulting report, his reading glasses making his eyes look enormous. Synthetic biometric simulation. That's a creative term for forgery. We never implemented, Axel began. But you tried, I said. October 17th, 1447. Someone using your credentials attempted to submit the Form 47R with a digitally constructed signature matching my biometric profile. The attempt failed because I had already revoked my access, but the intent is logged in each's system. Brad's typing stopped. The legal team started whispering urgently. Peter Voss looked like he was calculating how much this would cost in both euros and reputation. Mr. Morgan, Decker said, standing slowly. You're suspended from any involvement with regulatory filings, effective immediately. The investigation will determine if criminal charges are warranted. This is ridiculous, Axel exploded. She set this up. I deliberately protected this company from your recklessness, I said, my voice steady as a surgeon's hand. Every action I took was legal and within my rights as an employee being terminated. You, however, attempted to circumvent international environmental law because you thought regulations were just suggestions. I turned to the board. Gentlemen, I'll accept your offer with one modification. I wanted in writing that any future attempt to override, automate, or innovate around regulatory compliance must be approved by me personally, no exceptions. They agreed immediately. Of course they did. When you're drowning, you don't negotiate with the life preserver. Decker gathered his things, preparing to leave. Ms. Vance, I'll need you to file the correct Form 47R within 24 hours. I trust that won't be a problem. Already prepared, I said, pulling out the completed form. I just need to add my biometric signature. He almost smiled again. Paper backup? Always. As security escorted Axel from the building, his innovation journey ending in a perp walk, I stood at what used to be his office window, looking out at the Rotterdam port. Ships came and went, following regulations older than anyone in the building. Channels marked, speeds regulated, cargo documented. Miss Vance? Brad appeared at the door, looking like a kicked puppy. What happens to me? I turned to face him. You get to learn. Report to my office Monday morning. Bring a notebook, a real one. Paper. He nodded and scurried away. The legacy lady was back, and this time, she was writing the rules. The Rotterdam Herald ran the story 3 weeks later. Corradine Industries avoids catastrophic fine through emergency restructuring. They called it a triumph of crisis management. The business blogs dubbed it the Rotterdam Reversal. But in the hallways of chemical companies across Europe, they called it something else. The Legacy Lady's Gambit. Axel Morgan's LinkedIn profile went dark after news broke that he was under investigation for attempted regulatory fraud. Last I heard, he was teaching a workshop called Failing Forward, Lessons from Disruption, at a community college in Amsterdam. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Brad, surprisingly, became one of my best students. Turns out when you strip away the buzzwords and bravado, he actually had a brain. He now maintains our paper backup system with religious devotion. He even bought a label maker, old school, not Bluetooth enabled. The ECHA investigation concluded with a formal warning and mandatory oversight for 2 years. It could have been worse, should have been worse, but my return had demonstrated good faith efforts to remediate systematic failures. Inspector Decker sent me a handwritten note afterward. Well played, Ms. Vance. The seal says, hello. I still don't know if he meant an actual seal or if that was Dutch humor. Peter Voss retired 6 months later, but not before implementing every single reform I'd recommended. His replacement, Maria Lindqvist, was recruited from the Swedish Environmental Protection Agency. Our first meeting began with her saying, I've heard about you, the woman who saved a company by letting it almost destroy itself. I prefer to think of it as aggressive gardening. I told her, sometimes you have to let things die back before they can grow properly. She laughed. We've worked together seamlessly ever since. The consulting firm that had recommended synthetic biometric simulation quietly dissolved. Their website now redirects to a domain seller. Innovation, it seems, has its limits. But the real vindication came in small moments. The message from a junior compliance officer in our Berlin office. Thank you for showing us that expertise has value. The email from a competitor asking if I'd consider switching companies. We promise never to call you legacy. The handwritten card from Willem, the security guard. Glad you're back. The building felt wrong without you. 1 year later, almost to the day, I stood in the same conference room A where it had all begun. The ninth-floor view of Rotterdam port remained unchanged. Ships following ancient channels, commerce flowing through regulated pathways, order maintaining itself through careful, unglamorous, essential work. I was presenting the quarterly compliance report. Perfect record, as always. But this time, the room was paying attention, really paying attention, taking notes on paper, asking substantive questions, understanding that what I did wasn't a burden on innovation. It was the foundation that made innovation possible. Any questions? I asked, closing my presentation. Just one, Maria said. How did you know? How did you know they'd fail without you? I thought about the October tomatoes growing in my greenhouse, thriving out of season because I'd created the right conditions. I thought about systems and signatures, about paper trails and digital dreams, about the dangerous assumption that anything old must be obsolete. I didn't destroy the system, I said, echoing words I'd thought but never spoken aloud. I was the system. They just forgot that. Never underestimate someone who knows exactly what they're worth and what you're worth without them. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Maria smiled. The legacy lady. I like it. We should put it on your business cards. Already did, I said, pulling out the new cards I'd had printed. Senior Vice President of Regulatory Affairs and Compliance, also known as the Legacy Lady. Because some titles you earn, others you own. That evening, I returned to my cottage in Zandvoort. The tomatoes were ripe, red, and perfect in their defiance of seasonal logic. I picked one, still warm from the grow lights, and bit into it. It tasted like victory. Not the flashy kind that makes headlines, but the quiet kind that pays dividends forever. I thought about Axel's favorite phrase, move fast and break things. He'd been half right. Things had certainly broken, but the only thing that had moved fast was his exit. In my garden, I'd planted a new sign next to the tomatoes. It read, Legacy Greenhouse, where old methods yield new results. Because revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about demonstration. Sometimes the best checkmate isn't taking the king. It's making him realize he was never really playing chess at all. He'd called me the legacy lady as an insult. I'd made it a legend. Thank you for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If you enjoyed the Legacy Lady's Gambit, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in Marla's position? Let me know in the comments.